Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast about foreign policy and world affairs. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg, editor of UN Dispatch. And in this show, we discuss topical global issues, have conversations with foreign affairs thought leaders and newsmakers, and give you the context you need to understand the world today. Go to globaldispatchespodcast.com to learn more. And now on with the show. Benin is a geographically small country in West Africa, located between Nigeria and Togo. Since the 1990s, Benin has earned a reputation as a strong and stable multiparty democracy. There have been multiple elections and peaceful transfers of power. The independent democracy watchdog group Freedom House had consistently given Benin high ratings as a free country. However, that has all changed in recent years, and rather dramatically. Freedom House no longer gives Benin high marks as a free country, a degradation attributed to actions taken by the current president, Patrice Talon. He was elected in 2016 and soon after used the power of the state to undermine Benin's democratic institutions. Political opposition has been crushed and the constitution contravened as Talon consolidates power. Elections are now scheduled for April 11th, with no real opposition vying. What was once a nascent but flourishing democracy is now a country in significant democratic backslide. On the line with me from Benin is Jose Biaou. He is the spokesperson for the Alliance Patriotic de Nouvelle Espoir, or the New Hope Patriotic Alliance. This is an umbrella group that includes members of the political opposition. It is led by Jose Biaou's father, Rogetien Biaou, a former foreign minister of Benin. The group is advocating for a national dialogue to restore democratic norms to the country. We kick off discussing how and why Benin had a reputation for a stable democracy and the actions taken by the current Talon administration to undermine that reputation. We then discuss potential peaceful paths forward for reconciliation and dialogue in Benin. Benin, needless to say, is not a country that is regularly in the news. Do a Google News search for Benin elections, and you'll really not find very much at all, at least in the English language. So I was very glad to bring this conversation to you today as part of this podcast's ongoing effort to shine a spotlight on important stories around the world that don't get the attention I think they deserve, but nonetheless are extremely consequential. So here is my conversation with Jose Biaou, spokesperson for the New Hope Patriotic Alliance, the Alliance Patriotique de Nouvelle Espoir, in Benin.
Benin has been recognized as a standard bearer of democracy across the region and sub-Saharan Africa in general. We are one of the only countries in sub-Saharan Africa that transitioned from a dictatorship to a democratic administration without any bloodshed. And that was due to the December 11th, 1990 national dialogue, where President Kirikou was amenable to sitting down with the people to negotiate a transition, a stable transition, which led to open elections and brought President Mr. Soglo to power. So, and through that history over the past 25 years, we've been accustomed to pluralist party elections with anyone qualifying to become president or is able to post their electoral bid. And that has happened from 1990 to 2016.
And there have been changes, right? There have been changes in political power. I saw that, for example, President Kirikou, would sometimes win elections, would sometimes lose elections, but wouldn't, like other leaders in the region, cling to power.
Correct. No, absolutely. So, after President Soglo got to power, he organized elections in 1997, which he lost to Kirikou. When Kirikou came back, and had 2 terms, and then transitioned out to President Yayi Boni. So yeah, there's been stable transition of power, compared to other countries in the region that were essentially dictatorships, or power being held within the hand of one specific group without free and fair elections. So we're going through a very shocking process where the new administration has essentially put roadblocks to the democratic process.
So the current administration of President Talon came to power in 2016. Can you just give listeners a sort of a brief biographical sketch of who he is and how he came to power?
Yeah, Mr. Talon is an interesting character, and this is as described by former President Soglo. He's been in the business industry for quite some time, working in the cotton industry. Essentially, he was an importer of agricultural fertilizers. Essentially, that was his main business. But essentially, he's more of a government contractor, where he had a contract with the government importing agricultural products, and essentially use those relationships to get at the top of a farmers union, an agricultural union, and which he used to essentially get a hold of 10 cotton processing plants in Benin that were formerly owned by the government of Benin. So that was his main intro into the cotton industry, which essentially through negotiations and different relationships with government parties was able to become, one of the largest cotton producers, industrialists in the country. So that's where his wealth came from. He's been associated with the political class over the years. He's funded, multiple political parties. He's known to be one of the main backers of President Yayi Boni, who funded his campaign. So he's been very close to political power over the years. And, the next step coming into 2016 was for him to become president. Now, the issue that, Mr. Biaou was mentioning in one of his comments was that essentially Mr. Talon had a legal issue, so he was accused of poisoning former President Yayi Boni, which caused his exile to France, and he wasn't allowed back into the country, and the people essentially petitioned to allow him for a pardon by the president, which he got, which allowed him to come back to Benin to actually run for the 2016 elections. And, through alliances and support from other candidates, he was able to win the second round of the election in 2016 and became president that way.
So he was elected in 2016 through legitimate means. Yet, since taking power, Benin has experienced this kind of unprecedented for its recent history backsliding of its democratic institutions. Can you sort of just describe what happened? Why, for example, has Freedom House demoted Benin in terms of its ranking on democracy in recent years? What steps has President Talon taken to initiate this kind of democratic backsliding?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's a multi-step process, which started with the modification of the Constitution, the illegal violation of the changes of the Constitution without a consensus. I mean, it's ingrained in the Constitution that there needs to be a consensus to proceed to certain major modifications. Remind you that the Constitution was amended on the night of October 31st, 2019 by 10 members of the parliament overnight. So those decisions were taken overnight and then promulgated by the president of the Constitutional Court. So no consensus, whatever. It was rushed over a nightly process, very ambiguous and completely illegal and violating the Constitution. And that's what the Cour africaine des droits de l'homme, the African Courts of Human Rights, they rejected it. And after reviewing, there was a case, and they pronounced themselves as to the changes that were made to the Constitution were unconstitutional and invalid, and that we should go back to the 1990 Constitution that was decided on a consensus basis. So that's the major factor, and multiple courts have ruled on that, and they're refusing to apply these rules. The other component is a privatization of Benin's major industries. The most profitable industries have been privatized into Mr. Talon's businesses. So as a former businessman, essentially, who had economic power, he was able to use that power once he became president to privatize major industries. And, people...
Which industries, for example, are major industries in Benin that have been privatized to the fiduciary advantage of the president?
Correct. Yeah, so the agricultural industry, he was already in cotton, but now he's in, agricultural products like cashews, pineapples, and whatnot. But beyond that, he's privatized the oil industry. Benin has some offshore oil. He's privatized the port of Benin, which is, the major revenue generator of the Republic of Benin, the port. He used to be the general director of the port, but essentially he's been able to privatize the port by bringing in one of his personal companies to act as the customs, right? So all the revenues that are coming into the port, and again, I specify the port of Benin is a major revenue generator. He's been able to privatize that as well. In addition to other, if you go down the scales, all the way down to the taxi company. I mean, he runs Talon's companies are essentially 95% control 95% of the taxi business. So essentially, and it's a complete privatization. Even the hotel industry, we know people in the hotel industry that have built hotels that he's essentially taking over through his own businesses. So any lucrative business in Benin has been essentially privatized into his private companies.
And beyond that, I have seen reports in news about political opposition leaders being arrested and also being prevented from running in this upcoming election. Could you describe what happened there?
Yeah, no, that's another major thing, and the most recent one being Miss Rekia Madugu, who was essentially kidnapped, and for reasons that we still don't know. I mean, she was charged with terrorism, and the prosecutor general that was processing that case is operating on assumption. So that's the nature of the current government, the constant assault on the opposition, whether you're condemned for bogus charges or forced to exile or arrested. And that's the situation we're living in Benin right now. And people are afraid to speak. People are afraid to express themselves. He's been able to essentially put a gag order essentially on the country. And, people, there's no more freedom of expression. The media is very limited in terms of what they can publish. And that's just been the general environment. So that's another tool that he's used to exclude the opposition over time and eliminate the competition.
Well, can I ask you, I'm reaching you in Benin right now, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
How concerned are you that you and your father, who is a leader of an opposition group, will be arrested for speaking to me or for speaking out as you and your father have been doing?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's always concern. Obviously, we feel like we are in our full rights. As far as what we're doing, we're not doing anything illegal. We're operating on a patriotic basis in terms of speaking the truth and exposing what's happening. Obviously, being cognizant of the risk of, getting arrested or anything like that. But, the whole approach was to initiate the discussions to a national dialogue. So what we're offering is just advice to the president, real advice as to what is good for the people and for peace in the country. So, we have a peaceful message, And that's the approach we're taking. And, if they're going to arrest us for speaking the truth and try to bring the country together to a national dialogue, then, that's the decision they'll have to make.
So elections are scheduled for April 11th. What do you suspect will happen?
Yes. The current situation, again, if you look at the political landscape, there's President Talon running for re-election, and then two parties that he essentially handpicked to compete against him. So he's essentially picking his opponents. What I'm hearing on the grounds is that this election will most likely not take place. I don't have the details, but based on general discussions, we feel like we're still opting for a dialogue, and we're hoping that whether either the president takes that initiative, but we feel like the basis of these elections, considering that they're not constitutional, will likely not take place, and if they do take place, won't be recognized by the international community. And most importantly, is that Mr. Talon's constitutional mandate that he oath on, ends the night of April 5th at midnight. So legitimately, based on the Constitution, he loses all power as of April 6th. And the people have the right to put a transition in place. So it is to be seen, but our thoughts are that these elections as planned will not take place.
And rather, there will be, as you're advocating for, some sort of national dialogue in lieu of elections. Is that your sort of position?
Absolutely, yes, and that is the position of the African courts of human rights as well. Mm-hmm. These national dialogues is to bring the process back to the 1990 Constitution and organize free, fair, and transparent mm-hmm. elections on that basis. So that's exactly what you just said.
So lastly, Benin is a very small country, not a top priority for, say, the United States or many powerful countries around the world. It's not a country where you read about much in the news. I was doing a Google News search ahead of this. There's really not much about the upcoming Benin elections out there. Why is the story and the situation of the backsliding of democracy in Benin an issue that the international community at large ought to be concerned about?
Yeah, I think you made a good point. Benin is a small country on the map, but to be clear, the Benin has a very rich cultural history that has yet to be exported to the globe, and very, very large intellectual capacity. But in this framework, the reason why we think, major powers should focus on this election is, Benin and the sub-region, historically being the democratic standard bearer, the democratic front runner in West Africa. If we shift into a dictatorship, or following the decline in democracy in the region, that could be a major catalyst in the region, and I think it'll create a lot of instability that will be challenging for the world in general. So there is a catalyst as far as Benin right now, and if we see Benin shift, it will have major effects. So I think considering that we are a small country, we have a very rich history that should be of interest to foreign powers. But also the stability in the region, and then democracy in general, I think should be a focus in this case.
Well, Jose, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mark.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to Jose for the interview. And as I said at the outset, I was very glad to learn myself a lot about the situation in Benin and to bring this degradation of democracy ongoing in West Africa to you. Again, it's not an issue or not a part of the world or a country that routinely makes headlines. So it is part of the mission of the podcast to bring these stories to you, and I'm glad to have done so. And today's episode is supported in part through a grant from the Carnegie Corporation of New York to showcase peace and security issues in Africa. To view other episodes in this series, please visit globaldispatchespodcast.com, and a disclaimer that the opinions expressed in this episode belong solely to the individuals who expressed them. Thanks, and we'll see you next time. Bye.